Today on Conversations Aloud, we're diving into the hidden psychology of corporate power and asking the question, do you have to be unethical, manipulative, or even a sociopath to succeed in large organizations? From backroom politics to performative leadership, many people feel that merit alone isn't enough and that those who rise fastest are often the most ruthless. We're joined by Jonathan Grantham, who is a software entrepreneur and the founder and managing director of Nexoid, which is a software company specializing in business systems. He's also more recently authored the Corporate Sociopath Handbook, which explores the darker side of corporate psychology. Welcome to the show, Jonathan.
Thank you very much for having me.
Great to have you. So let's start off with, what personal or professional experiences inspired you to write the Corporate Sociopath Handbook?
So I've had a long career in consulting. I started off when I was 16 running a small IT business. We just bought and sold computers, simple retail. And then from then moved into all the different areas of IT consulting. And over that time, what you see time and time again is really good people getting squashed out, almost always because they didn't understand the politics. They didn't understand what was happening on a psychological level within a business.
So when you say squashed out, you mean people knew how to play the power game and manipulate people to jump over them?
And also just not being effective. So yes, I've certainly witnessed hundreds, if not thousands, of executions where there's been a deliberate coup done on an individual or group of people in a department. But I've also seen some incredibly talented people who just were not effective at inspiring change. They missed that people had hidden agendas. They missed that organization silos grew for a reason, what they were there, why they were there, what they were protecting. And I think these things are not always obvious to particularly IT people, I think just people in general.
Yeah. And I feel like, obviously startups and a lot of industries, the more competitive it is, the more you get this misunderstanding of people's intentions. In a very competitive environment, you will have people that will do anything and everything to be ahead. And so I guess you'd find that a lot in startups and consulting and in that kind of environments. I guess you see a lot of it. I mean, how do you define a corporate sociopath?
Just to go back to your previous point, it's less startups and more size. So the bigger the company, the more likely you are to find them. So when you're in a small startup, they sink or swim very, very quickly. And if you've got a manager that's behaved or a founder who's managing in a less than business focused way, then this will naturally sort itself out very, very quickly. The startup will collapse. Where you get the really impressive sociopaths is in large organizations. This is where there's a middle management layer and they have room to hide. And in many ways, the corporations actually encourage this behavior.
So just on that, do you feel that people stay longer in those organizations because there's a brand behind them, there's a name behind it, so they can endure that, as opposed to startups where if I'm facing this, I'll just leave and I'll go somewhere else?
There's definitely an element of prestige working for the big companies. But I'm not too sure that's what's actually attracting the sociopaths. I think it's more that it's a system and structure where they can get away with it. If you get enjoyment in life out of manipulating people, you need people to manipulate. If you're working in a startup with a team of 3 people, then you don't have the toys to play with. So it's not going to encourage that sort of behavior. The bigger the organization gets, the more room and more strategies, the more rooms and techniques work, and the more strategies you have to play these games. The freedom.
Yeah, that makes sense. So how do you define a corporate sociopath?
So these are terrible terms. So sociopath and psychopath are basically retired terms now. They still exist in sort of the public psyche. But ever since the 1980s, the DSM, which is sort of your psychological diagnostic manual, had retired both terms and just called them personality disorders. So what we're talking about is different types of personality disorders. And personality disorders it's a huge field, wide and varied, everything from um, simply nasty type people, right through to things that traditionally would have had very, very clear diagnosis. That being said, sociopath versus psychopath, the traditional definitions, or one of the definitions I always liked was a psychopath is born and a sociopath is learnt. If you read early materials, you'll see that sociopaths are meant to be the violent one and psychopaths aren't. Later material, you'll find it's actually the other way around. The
Mm.
simplest definition is that they do not feel empathy. This is somebody who doesn't care, or in extreme cases, is unable to even realize that they've hurt someone.
Okay. So it's the empathy element. I mean, a lot of people will argue that in tough situations where there's a lot on the line, you might need to make decisions with less empathy and more logic. Um, which is why I guess in a lot of leadership roles, it attracts those kind of individuals whereby they're very kind of 0-1 instead of how does this impact the person. Do you feel like we can, move away from that, or it's just part of the leadership role requires that element of making judgment quickly without empathy?
I'd say that organizations of any size are sociopathic by nature. Um, there's a little bit of chicken and egg here. Are you a sociopath and therefore you become a CEO, or are you a CEO who then learns to become sociopathic? And very difficult to test, but I'm sure you'd find evidence in both directions. Just look at the legal structure of an organization. So a limited liability company, or a publicly limited company, so this is a company that an individual owns or shareholders own, or a company which is traded on a public stock exchange. They're both governed by the Corporation Act, at least in the UK and in most Western countries. And the Corporation Act is absolutely clear. Your decisions and running of the business have to benefit the shareholder. So the
Yeah.
fact that you may like this person and they're going through a hard time and there's issues at home with the wife and maybe this person's going to end up homeless, that doesn't change the fact that you sack them if they're not good for the company.
Yeah.
So
Just
decisions
on
you may
that.
make as an individual do not line up with the shareholder.
Yeah, and you're right. And when I studied economics at university, we learned that the point of the directors is to maximize value for the shareholders. That is what their mission and objective is to maximize value
More
for
than
the
that,
shareholders.
that's their legal obligation.
It's
You are
illegal.
breaking the law. As a director of a software company, I am breaking the law if I let my ethics guide everything that I do. Now, obviously, there's a time and a place, and there's a line. You can't be
Mm.
completely ruthless. But let's take an extreme example. We can all agree that giving to charity is good. So if I take all the money in the company and give to a homeless charity, I could bankrupt the company overnight. I would feel good about it. This is a nice thing to do. I'm sure the homeless people would appreciate it. But I've also broken the law. What I've done is
Mm.
I've effectively stolen money off of the shareholders. So we operate in this sort of fascinating legal world where you're forced to be ruthless. And you see this play particularly in the UK. The UK has a sort of fascinating news cycles on this because you see these people go, company ABC is being done again for avoiding tax. It's like, that's their legal obligation. They actually have to reduce the amount of tax they're paying. And really, whenever I hear those headlines, what you're actually hearing is the government and politicians have created a tax system with loopholes. It's not the
Mm.
corporation's fault. It's the legal structure they're operating in. They have a legal pressure to operate to reduce costs, and tax is a huge cost.
Yeah, and I guess it's also the nature of capitalism to create a very competitive environment where it's the survival of the fittest, and so you need kind of, as you mentioned, the kind of leadership that pushes that to the extreme to be
Mhm.
above one else. Um, what I find a lot of times is that the companies that are listed on the exchanges, sort of like they're a public company where people can
Mhm.
buy shares, because they're listed and they're not a private company, everything is now focused on increasing share price of that company at all costs. And it's crazy working in a company in that field where they're just focusing on share price, maximize for share price, versus a private company where they're not bothered about the share price. They're also more focused on kind of creating an environment that people enjoy and love. So that difference is very interesting when you work in both those environments, and how the share price mentality impacts or amplifies the ruthlessness of
I'd,
leadership?
I'd argue both private and public companies are focused on increasing shareholder value, and that's a very business buzz term, but both of them are actually focused on share price. The difference is that in a public company, the share price is determined by the people buying the shares. It's a free market of trading shares.
Yeah.
And in a free market of trading shares, the share price is manipulable. You can say, oh, we've just created this amazing new AI. We're going to release it everywhere, and it's going to change the world and create billions of pounds. That will increase the share price without actually doing anything. Where if you compare that to, say, a private company, we can have that discussion. You can shout it from the rooftops. It's not going to make any difference. What I care about in Nexoid is how much did we sell? How much is it costing to deliver these projects? And what's the difference? And that's our profit. But both are share price in the sense of shareholder value. It's just in a public company, it's freely traded and manipulable. In a private company, the counts. That's all that really matters.
I agree. And just to add on that, I feel like the slight difference also is that in public companies, the leadership get rewarded with the shares. So for them, there's an incentive to maximize the share because they're also a shareholder, the kind of leadership level. In private companies, you sometimes find that, but sometimes you don't find that because it's a private company that doesn't issue shares to the leadership. And so there's a mismatch sometimes in incentives there. So it's interesting, but that makes sense what you said also.
A really good example of that is R&D. So if I was in charge of I don't know, pick any large company, let's say I'm in charge of British Airways. If that was a private company and I'm the shareholder, I would be heavily investing in R&D because that's going to make us more efficient. That will make our operations cheaper, which will increase profit over the years. If I was a CEO who was only coming in for a year or two, I would get rid of R&D. I'd stop all of that. It's an immediate saving. I can then go back to the shareholders and say, look, aren't I amazing? I've just saved you this fortune. Operation costs are down. Now, that will bite us in a few years' time, but that doesn't matter because I would have left by then. So there's a difference between how committed you are. In a public company, people are doing these as jobs. In a private company, at least if you're the shareholder or the founder, this is your money you're playing with. So you are going to take it a little bit more seriously and you are going to look long-term.
Yeah. And that I've seen that happen many, many times what you just mentioned there. So you describe the dark 5 personality traits that you have found. Can you explain them briefly and how these traits manifest in the kind of real corporate settings?
Sure. So one of the biggest problems I've had talking about corporate sociopaths is people go, oh, I had this boss who was absolutely terrible. And then they start describing them and you go very quickly, that isn't a sociopath, that's someone else. So remember, a sociopath is defined as a lack of empathy, either low empathy or no empathy at all, the inability to feel empathy. But you have the dark 5 personality traits, which is narcissism, Machiavellianism, sociopathy, sadism, and spitefulness. So think of these all as a spectrum. So everyone is at least a little bit of all of them. In the same way as anything in psychology or anything just in biology. But probably the easiest way to think about it is think about height or weight. You may not be heavy, you may not be tall, but you are at least a little bit heavy. You are at least a little bit tall. It's a spectrum that we can. Some people will be high, some people will be low. So if we go through them, narcissism is that everything comes back to me. I'm amazing, everything is there for my ego. You don't get that many of those in senior management. Middle management is quite often full of them, particularly in the American system. For whatever reason, these people are loved and respected. If you're the kind of person that can go into a meeting and go, trust me, I'm absolutely incredible. I have never done anything wrong. I am perfect in every way. I am a genius. People listen. If you say that in an English system, they look at you weird.
It's so funny, that difference between American and British, where the Americans love to blow their own horn, but the British don't like to do that.
I remember having a meeting years ago. I was heading up an IT department and we're going through the different heads and all the other heads are in America. And we would talk to the head of marketing. This is a big conference call. And how's marketing? Amazing. Awesome. Everything's incredible. How's finance? Amazing. Awesome. How's IT? Yeah, everything's okay. Oh my God, what's wrong? What's happened? What's it? No, everything's okay. We're on time. We're on budget. Everything's fine. No, to tell us what's the problem? So no, exactly what I just said. Everything's fine. If there was an issue, I'd report it.
Yeah.
But What I
So
find interesting, though, would to go back to your dark five personality traits, it's the other four which are extremely nasty and you don't want to work for. Machiavellianism has its time and place. These are the political schemers. These are the ones which will um, have long calculated plans, often going into years. These people will see them as tools and resources. You probably don't want them managing people internal, but having them as a consultant in your business is incredibly useful. So if you've got a big organization that has to work with government, let's say you're running Heathrow, having a Machiavellian player interacting with the politicians is extremely useful.
so
Sociopaths are great.
they're really good at influencing and manipulating people because they understand how
Yes.
power works.
And they do it slowly and they do it over long, long, long periods. A sociopath can
Yeah.
also do this, but it tends to be a lot quicker. They're thinking shorter term, maybe in months.
So this is calculated, strategic. Have you read the book 48 Laws of Power?
Yes,
Yes, that's a
yes. So that's a good example of Machiavellian thinking.
yeah. Okay, interesting.
Um,
So the first is narcissism, which is thinking about themselves a lot.
Yep, everything's
I
about
feel-
me.
Yeah, which I feel a lot of us kind of in this world have a bit of that. We're always thinking about
Oh,
ourselves.
absolutely. Just look at what's happening here. But both of us are going onto a podcast to try and broadcast a message. That's incredibly narcissistic. And this is what I was saying, is that everyone is a little bit of all of these. I think that there's a sort of tendency to go, oh, I have no sociopathy in me whatsoever. And when someone says that, I kind of have to call bullshit. That's just not true. We all have a little bit of bad behavior. And certainly when you get into sort of spitefulness and sadism, like again, you'll find this in low levels in absolutely everyone in society. If you're driving to work and someone cuts you off, can you honestly tell me that this doesn't affect you at all? Or do you get a little irritation? You go, oh, maybe I should pull in front of them and brake. Now, perhaps you won't do it. Perhaps your better angels stop you. But most people, it would be normal for that thought to go across for you to think
Yeah.
that thought.
Yeah, yeah. Interesting. So narcissism, Machiavellianism, and what's the other three?
Sociopathy, so sociopaths, sadism, and spitefulness. So spitefulness is this constantly seeking revenge, keeping track of everyone who's ever slighted you, whether it's pulling in front of you on the road, didn't hold the elevator when I came into the office. And also quite often paranoia goes with spitefulness. I see you talking to someone on the other side of the road and you must be talking about me, and therefore I need to get you later. Sadism is the enjoyment of pain. So these are people who will actually go out of the way to create pain. And these are people you absolutely do not want in a business. There is no use for them whatsoever. It's the same as spiteful. So sadism and spiteful, as soon as you've got anyone measuring even slightly above average there, get rid of them. Bad people for a business. Sociopathy, great for senior management. Machiavellian, great for external management. Narcissism, again, get rid of it unless you're in America.
Okay. So when it comes to leadership, you're saying the psychopathy, where empathy is a challenge. They're good at that because they can make those decisions, are more logical, obviously has drawbacks to it. But usually that you find them in those roles.
So you get sociopaths which have the inability to feel empathy, and then you have the ones that have the ability to ignore it. Now, if it's someone who ignores it, but is at least aware that there's an empathy or an ethical issue in front of them, they're quite powerful because that's a conscious decision. When they have the inability to feel it, now they're just playing blind. That may still be the right decision and often is the right decision in senior management, but at least know what ethical rules you're breaking.
Mhm. So when you're able to feel empathy and you're able to ignore it, is that stoicism, whereby you can feel it, but you can just take it as information and just move on, ignore it?
Yes, I sort of feel this is a little deeper though. It becomes such a trained, learnt behavior. When I talk to senior management, they'll often talk about ethics and morals in this theoretical term. And you'll almost see them going through their process, going, okay, here's our plan. We're going to make this strategic decision. Now let's check it. His finance is going to be okay. His marketing okay. His product's okay. His ethics okay. And they'll just go through it in their list.
Yeah. Okay. So they kind of go through it, but they're not really responding to the real emotions in a way that maybe others would have.
They're certainly not feeling it in both versions, whether it's a learnt behavior or just You can't feel it. Neither group is feeling it.
Okay.
And
So,
yeah,
so,
they have to learn pain as an academic concept. And you can teach empathy, by the way. So if you think of sociopathy as a scale and go, okay, 10 is extremely sociopathic, 0 is nothing, you'll naturally sit somewhere on that scale. Maybe you're a 7, maybe you're a 3, it doesn't matter, but you'll naturally fit somewhere on there. And you can push yourself up and down a couple of points with training. So if you are a naturally sociopathic person, and then you say join a church or some sort of community type, community? If you're surrounded by people from all different walks of life with all sorts of different problems, and you're listening and hearing and contributing, that's going to have a rounding effect, and you're likely to become less sociopathic. You can knock yourself down a couple of places. And the reverse is also true. So if you're slightly sociopathic and then you start working in a big organization and then you're in senior leadership where it gets even more competitive, you'll find yourself become more sociopathic. You'll actually learn the other direction.
Interesting. Do you know why, if you move more towards the community, you become less sociopathic?
It's a rounding effect. The people around you will change your behaviors. In the same as interest. If you come to the Nexoid office, all we talk about is code and architecture and clients and integrations and these sorts of problems. And they're all IT problems. That's 80, 90% of what we do and what we talk about. If you go to a sailing club, you're going to find people talking about yachting and sails and mooring fees. The group that you hang out with will change how you think and what you talk about. So if everything becomes sociopathic, how are we going to increase shareholder value? That's what you're going to get. If everything is community and charity, that's what you're going to get.
Yeah, you're kind of surrounding yourself with empathetic, maybe possible people, and you're going to have to develop a bit of empathy to interact with this kind of community, which would help, right?
And empathy, it's not just we should all learn to be empathetic. It's problems that require empathy. You're talking to someone who's recently just lost a parent. A couple has just got married, and isn't that a wonderful thing? These are conversations which are less likely to happen in a boardroom. So they're conversations that naturally lead to emotional responses.
Yeah. So if someone is listening to this and they think they're a sociopath, what is the advice to them? Is it go out and be part of a community that shouldn't be just people like you? It should be people that you wouldn't normally interact with.
I think my advice would be, first of all, understand yourself, work out how sociopathic you are and where the risks and dangers are. Obviously, it is not in your interest to go and hurt someone. There are repercussions to that. I think it starts off with understanding, and then I'd move on to direction. Where do you want to go in life? What are your objectives? If you want to fit in and pretend to be normal, then yes, absolutely. Go join community stuff, go do charities, go join a church. These are all good things. If you enjoy that side of yourself, then I'd suggest a corporate career. Go become a lawyer, go study business, go hang out in those worlds, because you will find a level of acceptance and happiness. There's a whole sort of concept in psychotherapy about whatever you repress will explode. And I think sociopathy is absolutely one of those concepts. If you are, you're not going to change the world, and there's only so much you can change yourself. So it's actually better to find a strategy where you fit into the world, where you're not doing damage, and you can contribute.
Interesting. So kind of see it as an advantage where you can leverage it, but with rail guards to ensure that you don't hurt people. I mean, you mentioned notice how much of a psychopath you are. Do psychopaths have a good self-awareness, would you say?
Yes and no. It will come down to how intelligent they are. Intelligent ones will naturally observe people, and they will observe themselves. So intelligent ones are extremely self-aware. Now, if you're an average intelligent sociopath, that's where it gets a bit messy. And these are the ones that the media will call psychopaths. These are the ones that will tend to get into trouble, tend to rob, steal, hurt. They're more likely to get in trouble with the law. Sort of an interesting side story on this. I did a project years ago where we were working on online marketing. So the idea was that we were taking information from dating websites and we're going to do analysis on what kind of personality you are. If we just take the simplest version, you're an emotional buyer or a logical buyer. So if you're an emotional buyer, I'd say, buy this Ferrari. It's really fast and amazing and everyone loves it. People will think you're cool and the girls will just dig it. that's an emotional argument. That's an emotional sales pitch. And if I'm selling it on logic, it would be does 0 to 60 in 2 seconds or whatever the stats are. So this idea is that if we could analyze and understand who and what you are from your dating profile, you then know how to sell to these people better. And the way that we started this project was that we went, well, we don't actually know the model of how many different buyer types there are or how many different selling styles there are. So let's just try and work out which groups are statistically different. So we do what's called a cluster analysis. And what we ended up with was all these different statistical groups within the dating site. So these were psychologically different, but they're only different in the terms of there's a maths group that we don't have a name to yet. We can see that they're statistically different, but we don't know what makes them different. And we ended up with a very, very small group that were extremely statistically different. And I thought, well, if we're going to start naming these clusters, we need to actually work out what these groups are. So I said, well, let's pick on this one. They're the most obviously different. It should be the easiest for us to work out what makes them different. So me, a couple of programmers and a couple of psychologists started flirting with these people and actually going on dates with these people to try and understand what is it that makes them statistically different. The first couple of dates were always amazing. Everything was incredible. They're really nice, genuine people. And by the third and fourth date, you begin to get this uneasy feeling in your stomach. And it turned out what we'd identified were sociopaths. And not only had we identified sociopaths, but we had identified extremely intelligent sociopaths. So an extremely intelligent sociopath is extremely good at hiding under the radar. You just will not spot it. And the only reason we were identifying them was because we were using data where they didn't know they had to hide. That was the key.
Mm. And so the fact that you grouped them just by looking at their profile indicates they were showcasing something that made them all very similar, and we were able to put them in a group before even meeting them. That's very interesting.
This technology, by the way, we were doing this in 2006, which is now 20 years ago. This is the technology which, I don't know if you've heard of Cambridge Analytica. This is the one that got blamed for Brexit and Boris and manipulating various other elections.
Yeah.
There's a similar technique that they were using on Facebook and other social media platforms to understand people's psychology and then manipulate en masse. So this is a predecessor to that. And it's a fascinating
scary
world.
because how much information you can gather online and how you can use it to make people angry or fearful to make sure that they take a particular action. And governments were just hiring this private company to make people vote in a particular way, which kind of basically breaks the essence of democracy. If you could just hire democracy, basically hire a company that will push the world or push the country in a particular way, it is scary.
It's a really interesting ethical question, because what's the difference between me looking at all your social media and maybe with a computer, maybe just a psychologist, and I just sit down and go through and work out all of your psychological drivers, and then writing a message to you, tailored to your psychology, or the two of us just sitting in a pub and having a conversation. When you talk to someone one-on-one, like this conversation, you're going to change your language, you're going to change your topics, you're going to change things that you care about and things that you don't care about. You'll match their energy. All we're seeing is, all we've done is the first time you're seeing this en masse and automated.
Yeah. I don't know. But that's the issue, right? Because if you're doing it one-to-one, you're just having a conversation with someone, right? But if you're doing it en masse and you have an intention, a specific intention that all the words that I'm using are going to lead you to think in a particular way so that you can act in a particular way, that becomes something a lot more dangerous, because, democracy is based on us being able to make informed decisions. But that means we need to understand the truth and we need to understand facts. But if that's just not there anymore, there's no truth, there's no facts, because I can just say whatever and manipulate you in a particular way, then it's hard to have, one, democracy, but two, have a country or a group that work together in an efficient way without creating kind of big conflicts.
We're really touching on morals and ethics here. I know this is an area I absolutely love. If we go back to the Ferrari example, we don't have to lie. Version 1 is, this car is sexy and people think it's really cool. And version 2 is, this car is really fast and a mechanical engineering masterpiece. Both versions are true. I haven't lied. It's just I've avoided information. I haven't given the other side of it. And if you're mechanically inclined or emotionally inclined, those arguments will affect you differently. Now, yes, there are obviously plenty of examples of politicians lying and campaigns that have got that horribly wrong. But if I was advising political parties on this, there's no need to lie. Absence of information is how you control it.
Yeah, which you see actually quite a bit where people don't divulge, the whole picture. They're just choosing what to share. Yeah, you can definitely see that. Maybe, going back to the Ferrari point, I would say most people make decisions based on feeling, how you feel about something, your emotion. So going with kind of how it makes you feel versus the technicals, they'll go from 0 to 60 in 2 seconds, for example, sells better. And you see that in politics too. It's about emotions. It's about feelings. How do you make someone feel to make them take a particular action? I feel like there's a feeling that caused the action to be taken.
I think people buy what relates to them is a better way of thinking of it. So if you're an emotional person, the emotional argument will hit you. If you're a logical person, the logical argument will hit you. And by the way, just dividing people into logical and emotional is ridiculously oversimplified. But if you consider things like, let's do UK politics for 2 seconds. So the Labour Party traditionally was the union party. The union workers, or the biggest unions, would be the nurses, the public servants, and the teachers. So if you're a teacher and you can relate to this, a very minor basic union type argument of we can increase wages and we can improve your working conditions, you're likely to vote for them. The logic comes afterwards. I was watching one that was rather interesting in Australia. It was junior doctors getting upset about how much they were being paid, even though they were one of the groups that actually did quite well. They have had indexed pay increases. They feel the arguments because they connect to it and, okay, this is my life. But when you actually compare it with the rest of society, they're doing better than everyone else and probably weren't the first going to get in trouble for saying this, but probably wouldn't be the first group if you're fairly and logically handing out the money.
Yeah. Okay. I want to go back to what you said before, which is the chicken or egg scenario. Is the problem really individual bad actors that have those traits that are good at those roles, or is it that large organizations are kind of structurally designed to reward low empathy and highly manipulative behavior? From what you've seen, which one has a stronger case?
There's definitely a structural element, as we said before, around the sort of Corporation Act, right at the very top. It has to be about adding value, not caring about people. There's a whole sort of fascinating side of corporate ethics where that doesn't mean simply doing the wrong thing adds value. And I think a lot of people get this confused. They sort of go this idea, well, that's easy. I'll just open a child sweatshop in Asia and therefore we'll do extremely well. That's not right either. I think the best way to consider ethics in a corporate way is to consider part of marketing. And you'll see companies that are extremely good at this. The Body Shop is a really good example. They're constantly talking about how they hire young people, they train young people, they care about the environment, everything's environmentally and ethically sourced. They're selling their green credentials. And the skeptic in me would go, how much of that is about your corporate ethics and how much of that is marketing that you know that your consumer's going to buy? Now, if you're asking the nature versus nurture, if you're not thinking that way, you just missed out on a marketing opportunity. So even if you're not sociopathic thinking, you're going to have to develop those skills extremely quickly or you're going to be overtaken by a manager and someone who is thinking that way.
In terms of what organizations can do, right? Because one thing that we hear a lot about is, DEI, diversity, inclusivity, equity, which kind of pushes, a variety of people to go into leadership roles, or that's one of the ideas of it. Do you feel like that helps? And if so, in what way?
I think it is not just right ethically or right for the business, but it's right for everyone to be inclusive and allow the best people to get to the positions. If you end up in a horrible situation with a brain tumor and you need to go choose a neurosurgeon, you want the best neurosurgeon. That's what's going to give you the highest chance at the highest quality of life. It doesn't matter what race, sex, creed, or anything else they are. You want the best person. And if we limit it and say, okay, women aren't allowed in medicine, you just knocked out half your population. That's a terrible idea. You want the best person. It's in everyone's interest for the best person. Now, where DEI goes wrong is they say, okay, well, we must have women are 50% of the population, therefore they must be 50% of the roles. That's a terrible idea. Because what you're going to end up with is people being put in roles not because they're the best person, but because they meet a quota. Now, the counter argument to this would be, how do you fix inequality that has been there over years or generations? And that is a much harder thing. And if you're trying to deal with it in the workplace, it's too late. By the time I've got a 40-year-old in front of me doing an interview, whatever inequality happened in their life has already happened. This needs to be tackled right back when they're children. You want an even playing ground in schools. You want an even playing ground in universities, in training and opportunities. A lot of businesses get attacked for this, but I think you'll find that actually, when you really look at the numbers, people are actually pretty good on diversity. We don't care. But one of the stats that always gets sort of thrown around is women get paid 80 pence on the pound. They're 20% cheaper. If that was true, I would have a completely female workforce. I could pay them 20% less. Why would I not? If everything was equal, if they could deliver the same thing, I've just knocked 20% off of my staff costs. And the fact you don't see companies doing that tells you that there's something wrong with the story.
That makes sense. And the angle I was coming at from was, do you feel that women and men have equal traits of being a psychopaths? Or do you feel it's more concentrated in men, which is why maybe you see more men in leadership? And if that's the case, would DI then kind of change that? Because then more women would kind of go up into those leadership, and if they have less of those traits.
So again, treat everything as a spectrum, in the same way as height is a spectrum. Men are on average 2 inches taller than women. That doesn't mean that tall women don't exist. In fact, if you go hang out with supermodels, you'll find they're all going to be taller than both of us. So to say that one sex has an advantage in one area or another is a general statement and does not apply to every individual in that group. Intelligence is your best predictor of income. Intelligence has a different curve between men and women. So men and women have the same average intelligence. In other words, if we take all the men in the world and all the women in the world, give them an IQ test, you'll find that they're all going to sit at the same spot. The average will be at the same spot. The difference is in the distribution. So men have a flatter curve and women have a tighter curve. What this means is that there is more average women and there is more stupid and genius men in the world. So men do quite well at both ends of the extreme. Some people hypothesize this is why you see so many men in prison. But you'll also see the other end on the positive side. If you're looking at top scientists, you will find that they'll be disproportionately male. That doesn't mean that a woman can't do the job. It just means that if you're taking a room and only looking at IQ 150 plus people, they're going to be disproportionately men. Sociopaths, as far as I'm aware, have the same distribution, but where they do differ a lot is in the techniques that they use. Now we're in sort of the nature-nurture again. I think you'd find that the nature side is the same. The nurture side is very different. No matter how hard we try, we do treat boys and girls differently at school. And they grow up in different social environments with different problems. A lot of the female sociopathic behavior could be described as, or explained as, extensions of bad schoolgirl behavior. So when you look at things like sort of creating rumors, exclusion, bullying, those sort of nastier social skills, these are definitely things you find in female sociopaths more than male sociopaths. Again, doesn't mean that there aren't male sociopaths that don't do it, and there are definitely female sociopaths that don't do it. But reputation damage is definitely a trait that you'll find more on the female side. Male sociopaths tend to be a lot more focused on systems. So bureaucracy, laws, technology, those tend to be the tools of male sociopaths.
Very interesting. Yeah, very interesting that we use different tactics. If we're thinking about defensive strategies, what are maybe 3 actionable steps that you recommend to someone who suspects they're dealing with a sociopath?
If you know you're dealing with a sociopath, work out what their agenda is. What are they trying to do? And for most sociopaths, all you have to do is ask them. This is not hard. I'm a consultant. I'm working for you. What are you trying to achieve here? What do you want? Do you want a bigger department? Do you want your personal pay to increase? Do you want to consume another department? And if you actually ask that outright, my experience is that they'll be very honest with you. Something a lot of people look at me weird when I say I quite enjoy working for sociopaths because I find them very straight and predictable. Normal people are the ones that tend to have unclear objectives, and it's even then themselves don't know what they're actually doing. Where a sociopath will be very, very direct and have a clear objective. Once you know what the clear objective is, don't get in the way. This person's going to achieve it with you or without you. So if you want your career to do well, find out what the objective is and be instrumental to helping that objective. And if you do that, not only will they not attack you, they'll defend you. You'll actually end up with a super shield. The things that a sociopathic boss will do to protect someone underneath them is incredible. If they see that person as valuable, all sorts of dirty tricks will be used to protect and help you, and your career will skyrocket. I've watched people in the bank literally double their salary in 12 months, purely by aligning themselves with a sociopathic manager. And if you do that, you'll end up with a very easy work life.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And then for leaders and HR professionals or organizations, what changes can they make to ensure that those traits do not damage the culture or company, but also leverage it to their advantage?
You definitely don't want to kill it because it does help a company. What you want to stop is the hidden behaviors. Like an example I just gave, where there was a director who had a personal objective that didn't line up with the corporate's objective. So they're not going to do that if they know it's visible. So visibility and knowledge sharing is probably the most important thing. Maybe you're a better person than that other person. But odds are, if you're actively attacking someone, that's not good for the business. How can we stop that? You make it visible. So instead of having closed silos where everything is hidden off in little meeting rooms, you try and make the entire company aware of everything that is happening in the company. As much information as possible should be freely available. This is good for businesses in general. Businesses that are good at information sharing are statistically more profitable. It's as simple as that. The better you are at sharing means you go, I should go talk to this guy. This guy's the expert in whatever technology. And that will save 2 weeks on my project. And that only happened because I knew about that person existing. How would you do that practically? The model I really like is moving people around, junior and even up to mid-level, saying, okay, your job is you're a programmer in IT. However, for 4 weeks of the year, you need to go find 4 other departments to go live in. So I want you to go spend a week in marketing. I want you to spend a week in finance. I want you to spend a week in HR, and I want you to spend a week in operations. And by doing that, you create there's a couple of advantages. One of them is that obviously when they come back to the IT department, they're going to have connections in those departments and go, look, this is an operations problem. Darren runs that. Let's go talk to him. They're going to have knowledge and awareness of other business functions. You're just going to get more ideas and cross-sharing. And if there are dodgy things happening, it's going to get harder and harder and harder to hide them.
Right.
It also forces you as a department. So if I then have these random people coming into my department, it forces me to be a lot better at training. It forces me to be a lot better at knowledge sharing. Okay, you've entered a programming group. This is what we're working on. This is how we manage the tasks. This is how we get the requirements. This is how we manage productivity. And I have to get much better at sharing that knowledge, which is something that, interestingly, good managers are very, very bad at. So if you are a really good manager, your staff loves you, what happens is you get stability, and you can have 2 or 3 years without having to make a hire. And if you haven't made a hire within 2 or 3 years, you haven't had to interview, you haven't had to explain anything, you haven't had to share. So by having these people that are rotating through, it forces you to constantly rethink about your team and your department. I think that's the best practical answer that's easy to implement.
This has been amazing. If people wanted to find out more about you, or where can they find the book, where can they go to do that?
So the book's available. There's an ebook. There's a print version. You can find it on Amazon. You can find it on Apple. You can find it on Google. It is all over the place. All you need to do is search, really. So that's the Corporate Sociopath Handbook. My name's Jonathan Grantham.
Awesome. And if they wanted to kind of follow you, do you have a particular place where they could do that?
The easiest way is through the Nexoid website.
Jonathan, it's been great speaking to you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for having me.